Good afternoon. So nice to see you all. My name is Erin Payton, and I am the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is located in Oak Park, Illinois. Our mission is strengthening our community through learning, giving, and sharing our landmark building. And while we may not be in our landmark building today, we're still going to be putting on an amazing program in collaboration with Writing Matters. So I am going to go ahead and give you a background of the two gentlemen who will be speaking today. The first is Thomas Lynch. Essayist, poet, and funeral director Thomas Lynch was born in Detroit, Michigan. His critically acclaimed volumes of poetry include The Sin Eater, a breviary from 2011, Walking Papers from 2010, Still Life in Milford, 1998, Grimalkin and Other Poems, 1994, and Skating with Heather Grace, 1986. Lynch is also the author of essay collections such as The Depositions, New and Selected Essays on Being and Ceasing to Be, 2019, The Good Funeral, Death, Grief, and the Community of Care, 2013, and The Undertaking, Life Studies from the Dismal Trade, 1997. He has received numerous awards and grants from the National Book Foundation, the National Endowments for the Arts, the Michigan Council for the Arts, and the Irish Arts Council. A frequent guest lecturer at universities across North America, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Australia, Lynch is an adjunct professor in creative writing at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Bill Young is the proprietor of Midwest Media, an author services company providing escorting and support to most of the authors visiting Chicago and the surrounding areas. Since 1987, he's spent more than 8,000 days on the road with everyone from former presidents to celebrity dogs. In the 1980s, he was the producer, host of The Baseball Show during the early days of cable television, and a longtime member of Oak Park, Illinois. Enjoy!
Thanks, Erin.
Hi, everybody. Tom, thank you for doing this. It's a pleasure to see you. It's been a couple of years. Let me set the stage for today. Erin read of a number of books, but we're going to succinctly pare that down to two new books. You have 5 collections of poetry, all of which have been partially contained in Bone Rosary, a collection of poetry of your career. And similarly, 4 books of essays have been distilled into The Depositions. And we'll be reading from those 2 books. And those are the 2 books in terms of attention, we'll refer to them as the books that, well, we hope that you read and buy. I met Tom over 20 years ago in Indianapolis at a regional, I guess it was the Great Lakes bookseller. And you were an after dinner speaker at that convention. You just won the Heartland Prize from the Chicago Tribune for The Undertaking. You'd won the American Book Award and also were a finalist at that time for the National Book Award. It was a fine book. I sat at a table with you, liked you immediately. And I'm going to ask you, it's the oldest work here that we're going to read today, but it really is a great introduction to you. So the beginning of The Undertaking, and another reason I want you to read this is that anything you've written is enhanced by hearing you read it.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you, Bill. And thanks for the invitation to be here. Thanks to Erin and the 19th Century Association, and thanks to people tuning in, because it's nice to be outnumbered when you go reading prose and poetry. So this is the first essay in The Undertaking. It's called The Undertaking. Every year I bury a couple hundred of my townspeople. Another 2 or 3 dozen I take to the crematory to be burned. I sell caskets, burial vaults, and urns for the ashes. I have a sideline in headstones and monuments. I do flowers on commission. Apart from the tangibles, I sell the use of my building. 11,000 square feet furnished and fixtured with an abundance of pastel and chair rail and crown moldings. The whole lash up is mortgaged and remortgaged well into the next century. My rolling stock includes a hearse, 2 Fleetwoods, and a minivan with darkened windows our price list calls a service vehicle, and everyone in town calls the dead wagon. I should tell you about that though, Bill. The reason that ever got written was, and the reason this book is dedicated to Gordon Lish is because after he had published my first book of poems, which, like most books of poems, are internationally ignored, and he called me up and said, "Do you ever write anything besides poetry?" And I said, "Well, I could." And he said, "Good. Well, just write me 3,000 to 5,000 words, and I'll put it in a very important literary magazine," which I took to mean no one would read it and they wouldn't be paying me. So I felt fairly free to write whatever I wanted. And when I couldn't figure out what to do, I called him back and he said, "Well, I don't care what you write. Just tell us what it is you do," which is the formula for a Rotarian classification speech. And I had to give those from time to time when the drain commissioner didn't show up to be our luncheon program. So the classification speech became the intro to this book of essays. And I've always been grateful to Gordon for that.
Let me say as a footnote, and take this and follow this thread, because one of the persons that read that was Alan Ball, who created 6 Feet Under.
Yeah.
And what he says about you is that reading Thomas's work is to suddenly be able to see what it's like to be comfortable with mortality, to respect it but not fear it, to see both the absurdity and the beauty of death, sometimes simultaneously.
Yeah. Well,
that's 6 Feet Under.
It's high praise for an artist like Alan Ball. So I'm glad to hear that read again. Thank you.
So we've heard, this is the, you were an Undertaker, and it's a big part of your family's history. A lot of members of the family together, your father, your brothers, your sisters, all in the business. We're going to talk about that later, but just to flip the coin here, how did you become a poet?
Well, I read poetry, and it's, I've always said that writers are readers who go karaoke. So if you read poetry, you will eventually, like the backbencher in every church listening to sermons, he'll say, "I could say that better," you know? And so poetry begets poetry. And since I had a standard Irish Catholic upbringing, most of our prayers, most of our formulae, most of our childhood lessons were poetry. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Irish poets, learn your trade, sing whatever is well made. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Now I lay me down to sleep. God is great, God is good." All these rhymes and meters sort of inhabited my upbringing, and so I started committing poetry.
And on your own?
Well, no, I had a true mentor in the person of Michael Heffernan, another internationally ignored poet, who was that bit older than me. He professed English at the university that I attended as a ne'er-do-well undergraduate student, and he was writing poetry. He was the first living poet I ever encountered. He was writing actual poems, and we became drinking buddies for typical reasons. And I thought, when I first got his first book in the mail in 1978, I thought, these poems will outlive him. They will, of course. We're all in that red zone, and the great subtraction has begun, as we're constantly reminded. And but the poems are in the library, Michael Heffernan's poems, and he made me think that I could do it.
well, and you certainly have. Uh, I want to transition to let you read a couple of the poems. These are from Still Life in Milford. This is a book that I actually toured Chicago. Actually, we did an event at Barber's Bookstore, which is about a block away from the 19th Century Charitable Association in Oak Park. So you've been here, and given that I'm in Chicago, I would like to read a book about, or a poem about a painting in the Art Institute that anybody who's been to the Art Institute will recognize this painting. And this is Art History Chicago.
Art History Chicago. Yeah, and I have to thank Chicago. I mean, the only reasons I've ever been to Chicago are for book events, on book tours, or funeral director conventions, which I've been to a good few. If Tom Waits is appearing, I go there and things like that. On one such occasion, I happened to be in Chicago, coincident with a visit by one of the Tata sisters, who are dedicatees of this selection of poetry, because I've always found them. I always think of them as the best readers of poetry I've ever met, and so this is not so much a love poem as a longing poem, So, Art History Chicago. It's not so much a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte as the point of order, according to Seurat, that bits of light and color, oil paints aligned in dots, become the moment caught. Verbs slowed to a standstill, the life examined. We step back wide-eyed for a better look. An assemblage of Parisian suburbanites in Sunday dress, top hats and parasols are there among the trees beside the river. There are girls and women, men and dogs in random attitudes of ease and leisure, a stretch of beach, boats in the blue water, a woman with a monkey on a leash, a stiff man beside her, a mother and daughter, that little faceless girl who seems to look at us. And everyone is slightly overdressed except for a boatman stretched out in the shade. He smokes his pipe and waits for passengers. But I have never been to Paris. I've never holidayed beside the Seine nor strolled with a French girl in the gray morning as in this Paris street, a rainy day, Gustave Caillebott's earlier masterpiece, 3 galleries down in this collection. So I do not know these cobblestones, this street, this corner. This couple seems intent on turning, but I've walked with a woman arm in arm, holding an umbrella in a distant city, and felt the moment quicken, yearning for rainfall or a breeze off the river or the glistening flesh of her body in water, the way this woman's is about to be, that Degas has painted in the morning bath. She rises from the bed, removes her camisole, and steps into the tub 100 years ago. History's a list of lovers and cities, a mention of the weather, names and dates of meetings in libraries and museums, of walks by the sea or through a city, late luncheons, long conversations, memories of what happened or what didn't happen. But art is the brush of a body on your body, the permanent impression that the flesh retains of courtesies turned intimate, the image and likeness, the record kept of figures emergent in oil or water by the river, in the rain or in the bath when, luminous with love and its approval, that face, which you hardly ever see, turns its welcome towards you yet again.
That was wonderful. And again, it's a pleasure to hear you read. Yeah, that's the Art Institute. Those are a couple of paintings that I'm sure that everyone
Yeah,
knows. I mean,
yeah.
Sunday in the Park with George, and also the Kayabat is my favorite painting in the place.
Well,
When do you work? Because I have an idea that it's a natural transition from what you did as a director into sitting down to write. I think that uh, maybe the mindset is different. There's a precision, a deliberation. Uh,
well, the I mean, poetry is sort of a that always has an acoustic predicate for me. I hear something assembles in my brain box that suits a certain. In my case, it's always a count of syllables and a count of beats. It has. I mean, it has a definitely uh, a pentameter to it. There are usually 10 or 12 syllables or something like that.
so this is something that's ongoing when you're walking the dog. It's just,
Walking is a particularly good way to get this to happen.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was just to decide, the book I was talking to you about yesterday, the Home Waters by John McLean. His father, Norman McLean, a river runs through it, was a student of Robert Frost
Yeah.
at Dartmouth. And the most famous poem by Frost, Walking by Snowy Wood on a
Snowy
winter night.
evening, walking by.
And he couldn't finish the poem. He couldn't finish the poem. He had the rhyme scheme AABA, AABA, and then he gets to the final stanza, and the third line is "and miles to go before I sleep," and he couldn't think of the fourth line, and he
Yeah.
just repeated it, and it's what he's known more than anything else. And miles to go before I sleep.
Yeah. He had the same lock on those syllables, so that if you go to Vermont, I think was where his graves are, he and his wife. I had a lover's quarrel with the world, and for her sake, together, wing to wing and oar to oar. He had this marvelous way of always tampering with those syllables in a way that, shook them loose from their iambics, but they were nonetheless true to that inspiration, expiration, plotting.
What you're talking about is something that's not learned on your own, in terms of the precision and the language of that. Where is that? Did you
I don't
put
know.
everything
I think
together?
maybe there's something about I think there's something maybe about our species, certainly about English speakers of our species, that regards that. I can remember years ago, Bill, standing at the back of the Lutheran church in Milford and listening to a father give a eulogy for his daughter who had died in her youth by a disease that I can't remember the name of. But I remember him saying in this eulogy, "The thing you fear the most will hunt you down." And I was in the back of church, and I knew immediately that was a sort of a line like Frost would use. It was 10 syllables of true stuff that rang true. And it turns out to be true. The things we fear the most do hunt us down.
And also your exposure to Ireland. I mean, the Irish writers that I know are just the most conversant, just a pleasure lilting uh, sound of conversation when we speak. I'd like to read the title poem now of The Still Life in Milford and give the audience another taste of your work.
This is another one based on a painting. My friend Richard Tillinghast, I'm sure you've met Richard before, and he came up with this plan to disabuse one of Ann Arbor's wealthier citizens of enough money to come up with a book of poems based on paintings in the University of Michigan Museum of Art. And so, as a typical procrastinator, I waited till it was overdue, and then I went down to the museum to find a painting. My brother-in-law, Pat Young, who did all the photography, worked for the University of Michigan Art Department for years, had sent me the catalog of their collection, one of which was called Still Life in Milford by a painter by the name of Lester Johnson. And I thought he might have been related to the Johnson brothers in Milford, Michigan. There were 5 of them. I buried them all, the bed of heaven to them. And but it turns out Lester Johnson was an artist from Milford, Connecticut. He taught at Yale. And his Still Life in Milford was an actual painting that was given to the university by one of the former presidents of the university, whose wife didn't like it with her decor and said, give it to the university, give it to the art museum, they'll use it, and we'll write it off. And so there it was in their permanent collection, which meant that it hadn't seen the light of day for years. They showed it to me because I promised not to do anything to it, and it occasioned this poem, Still Life in Milford, Oil on Canvas, by Lester Johnson. You're lucky to live in a town like this with art museums and Indian food and movie houses showing foreign films and grad students and comely undergrads. Years back, I'd often make the half-hour trip. It was good for my creative juices to browse the holy books at Shaman Drum. Still, life in Milford isn't all that bad. We have 2 trendy restaurants and a bar well known by locals for its coney dogs. We have a bookshop now. We even have a rush hour, art fairs and bon vivants, and a classic car show every October, mostly muscle cars, Dodges, Chevys, Fords, no psychic healers yet or homeopaths. Still, life in Milford has a certain ambiance, more Wyeth than Picasso, to be sure, more meatloaf and potatoes than dim sum. Fact is, at first I thought this Lester Johnson was a shirt-tailed cousin of the Johnson brothers, long-standing members of the Chamber of Commerce in Milford, Michigan, like me. In fact, his only connection to these parts was Still Life in Milford, gathering dust here in the basement of the art museum. His own Milford's somewhere back east, near Yale. The day job teaching he could never quit, the way that Robert Frost taught English here and Donald Hall before the muse in them escaped their offices in Angel Hall. They were last seen running and maybe running still. Life in Milford, Michigan is similar. I have steady work, a circle of friends, and lunch on Thursdays with the Rotary. I have a wife unspeakably beautiful, a daughter and 3 sons, a cat, a car, good credit, taxes and mortgage payments, and certain duties here, notably when folks get horizontal, breathless, still, life in Milford ends, they call, I send a car. Between the obsequies, I play with words. I count the sounds and syllables and rhymes. I try to give it shape and sense like so. 8 stanzas of 8 lines apiece, let's say. 10 syllables per line or 12, just words. And if rhyming's out of fashion, I fashion rhymes that keep their distance. 4 lines apart, like so. Still, life in Milford keeps repeating. Say, I'm just like Lester, just like Frost and Hall. I covet the moment in which nothing moves and crave the life free of life's distractions. A bucket of flowers on a table, a vase to arrange the flowers in, a small pipe, is it, smoldering in an ashtray to suggest the artist and impending action? Still, life in Milford seems a parable on the human hunger for creation. The flowers move from bucket to vase, like moving words at random into song. The act of ordering is all the same. the ordinary becomes a celebration. Whether paper, canvas, ink, or oil paints, once finished, we achieve a piece we call Still Life in Milford. Then we sign our names.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The poems are so enhanced by you reading them, and I enjoy reading them, and I see this, and I feel the same rhythms whenever. You're a very accessible poet, and but it's still much better when you do it and when I listen to you.
I had the chance to talk to Lester Johnson before he died and to seek forgiveness for having taken his painting.
I
because
Googled
permission wasn't available, so I just sought forgiveness because his painting was on the front cover of that book when it was published back in the day.
I couldn't find it. I Googled him and I came up with a sculpture that was very different from him. Obviously not the same artist. It's not a common name, but not really uncommon. But I couldn't find it. I'll look again.
This is the painting. It is a bucket of flowers. Yeah.
No, I have the.
Yeah.
I do have the book, but I'll
it's
look at that.
Yeah.
I want to
anyway, he gave me forgiveness and then died a few months later, the poor man.
Well,
so, as we do. So
yes, you do. We all do. I want to transition to now we're going to combine both of your lives and the similarities between being an Undertaker and being a poet. And there's a section called Reno in the depositions, and you are playing the dollar slot machines at a funeral directors convention in Reno. And the week before, you'd been in Rotterdam at the International Poetry Foundation. And the week before, you were in Kentucky at a funeral directors conference. And the week before, you were on book tour for the poetry, for the book. So these are the two factions of your life, that you are the yin and the yang, always going back and forth, but you bring it together in this chapter called Reno. And I'd like you to read just a couple selections or a couple paragraphs shortly after that chapter begins.
This is, I remember writing this. I wrote this in the morning. I got up really early and I went down to the casino where the food was cheap and wrote this essay. Anyway, among my writerly friends, the hushed talk eventually comes round to the fact that I'm a funeral director. How is it, they want to know, that someone who writes sonnets also embalms, sells caskets, drives a hearse and greets the mourners at the door? It strikes them as a strange commingling of the mortuary and literary arts. Why, they wonder, don't I take up a day job teaching grad students something meaningful about dactyls and pentameters at the university? Among my fellow funeral directors, I am likewise suspect. There are dark rumors about bookish and artistic types, a wariness that owes, I suppose, to Mitford and Waugh, a mistrust of wordsmiths and journalists. Why, they wonder, don't I take up golf or the stock market, boating or web browsing? Of course, my publishers have made some hay off of this to their own advantage and to mine. An undertaker / poet, like a cop who sings opera or a wrestler turned governor, makes for good copy and easy interviews. Oddity and celebrity are near enough cousins. Ink and airtime, coin of the realm in the infotainment industry, are easier when you have a quirky angle. Much the same. The mortuary associations have put me on the circuit of state and national conventions where I'm fresh fodder for the programs and exhibit committees. After years of psychobabblers and marketing gurus dispensing warm fuzzies and motivationals, a reading and book signing by a poet and author and one of our own has a certain panache. I charge accordingly as any dancing bear would do. Whenever funeral directors get together, they talk about the fact that no one likes funerals. Whenever poets get together, they talk about the fact that no one likes poetry. Co-misery plays a big part in their get-togethers. There are worries over audience interest in the marketplace. For poetry readings, the general rule is if the poet is outnumbered, it is a success. If outnumbered by a dozen or more, it is a huge success. A crowd like the crowds they turn up in Rotterdam, hundreds to listen to the likes of me or Lorna Goodison from Jamaica or Chen Li from Taiwan or Haji Gora Haji from Zanzibar, such multitudes will be mentioned in our obituaries. He once filled the Rotterdam City Theater. It will read a tasteful dose of hyperbole with people hungry for his poems. Lost to literary history will be the three Dubliners who turned out to Bewley's Cafe in Grafton Street one Wednesday in October some years ago, my driver, the event's organizer, and one fetching young woman who took to be a discerning reader, but it turned out she was actually lost. The same rule holds for funerals. Whenever 2 or 3 are gathered is enough to outnumber the dead guy. If one of them will stand up and hold forth, you've got all the ingredients you will ever need. Someone who agrees to quit breathing, someone who cares, and someone who's trying to make some sense of all of this. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I'm reminded about 2 years ago, there was an Onion article about the current book tours, and they said sometimes you fly into a town, you book a hotel, drive to the event, and there's only 2 or 3 people, disappointing 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
Otherwise, other times it's a respectable 8 or 9.
Yeah. They had it right, didn't they, Bill?
Yeah. We've talked about Michigan. We've talked about your 2 careers, and now a big part of your life began in 1970 when you went to Ireland, and it's remained a part of your life. It's the second home right now, and it's. I just want to talk about that because you've written about Ireland and Booking Passage, and it's a history of your family, and it's a history of your family there, and it's a wonderful commingling of these 2 cultures, and also your cousin Nora, who you went to see, and then we'll talk about that, and then I have a few questions about the family.
Well, I was fortunate to get a high number in the Nixon draft lotto, and you have to be of a certain age to remember that. That lotto was drawn in, I think, December of 1960.
I have the same story, exactly the same story.
Yep.
I had a higher number than you.
You were probably a better student, but I was a fairly lackluster college student at the time, and I thought I'd better do something really worthy since I won't be going off to Vietnam. And so I thought, well, I'll go to Ireland because the only thing that interested me were the poems of William Butler Yeats and Patrick Kavanagh and James Joyce's fiction. So I went off to Ireland, but I knew that we had connections there. My grandmother, long dead, God bless her, had the address of what were first cousins to her husband, and they lived on the west coast of County Clare in a treeless landscape that I'd never seen the ocean before going to Ireland. So I arrived there in February of, I think, it was February of 1970, the 3rd of February, 1970. And I must have been as disappointing a Yank as ever got there. I had no money, no prospects, no plans. And I just sort of brought myself to this house, and Nora Lynch assumed that she could make something good of my visit. And as it turned out, it worked out. It did work out. And it changed my life for in so many ways, I keep discovering them the older I get, you know. But there was a feeling immediately of a home place, not only in terms of the geography, but in terms of the kind of conversations and colloquies that went on in the townland.
Well,
And they included me in them because I was the only voice sitting at the fireplace that they hadn't heard before. And I thought I was really interesting. It was just that I sounded different, you know.
well, they'd just come into the modern world too. I mean, electricity hadn't been there that long, and
Not
the
quite
story,
20 years then.
yeah,
Yeah.
the storytelling was a big part of it. Just
Yeah, they had a they still have a custom called paying court, which is that a neighbor has to go into a neighbor's house and give them the news of the world as they apprehended it when they went to the cattle mart or the Cayley dance or something in the next town. And so people talking to people was their main entertainment. Everybody had to have a party piece. So I would typically read them Yeats poems, and by God, he can write, they'd say.
and you still live in the same house.
I have that house. It was the house that my great grandfather came out of in 1890. So for me, it has a powerful actual and metaphoric impact for me. Yeah.
And we talk, you're really connected with those people too. You mentioned that when we were talking before uh, starting this, that you know, there's a number of funerals you missed of friends that had passed in Ireland.
Yeah. In Ireland, the done thing is that you show up, you know.
Yeah.
And,
well, and you talk a lot. I mean, the book is filled, and they're very buoyant stories about your own family. I mean, Nora, even your father, who
well, I mean, there are only a couple big events: birth, death, and marriage. You know, and in the case of birth and in the case of death, it's one to custom. Or marriage is a little bit of wiggle room now, but the funerals are the things you must show up for. And I'll never forget. I think that's when Nora Lynch began to take me seriously. Some months after I'd been there the first time and the second time. Her brother Tommy died in March of 1971, and she took a bike into town to the post office to make a call here to tell me, and I showed up the following morning. I was able to get a plane that night and showed up in Moveen the next morning to help her, you know, with the funeral for her brother, with whom she'd lived for 21 years, the two of them trying to keep a foothold in that home place, you know, where her parents had lived and died, and all their siblings. And so, yeah, it's and even now, when a neighbor dies, if I show up, you know, someone will say to me, "Fair play to you, Tom Lynch," when I'm standing in the bedroom next to the corpse, because they know that it took an effort to get there. But that's I think, you know, going there, pitching in, doing your part, it's just part of the done thing.
And you think that's generally true in our society, that there's been a continuity in the end of life?
Well, I think there are cultures that are still small cultures based on connections that still bind, whether they're religious or secular. There are bindings that people still, but our nation is based on mobility and disengaging and disentanglements, you know. Whereas Ireland, everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody till everybody knows everybody. And you can't say anything about an Irishman without it getting back to them, you know. So there's more gossip and there's more goodwill on account of that.
No, I love the culture too.
Yeah.
And the Irish writers I know, I treasure those friendships.
Oh yeah, and I remember, you know, when Dennis O'Driscoll died on Christmas Eve of 2012. I showed up. He was taken to church. I sat between Elaine Nakulinen, one of the great poets of Ireland, and Seamus Heaney, possibly the greatest poet of Ireland then alive. And, I walked with Seamus up to the grave the following morning because he'd recently had a stroke and I'd recently had a heart valve. So we took our time, but we got there in time to help bury our friend. When Seamus died, less than a year later, I called the Undertaker and said, I'd like to ride in the hearse. I think somebody who knows these poems should be with him. And it was a 3.5-hour ride, but I just felt I was doing what I could do, So
Oh, I love Seamus Heaney. Actually, he's another guy that I toured. He was in Oak Park. He wanted to see the
yeah.
historical structures in Oak Park, Hemingway
He
and
was a
Frank Lloyd
gentleman.
Wright.
Yeah,
He and his wife shortly before he died.
yeah.
Um, I know we're trying a lot of the things we talked about. The Undertaking, it was an early book, and Still Life in Milford. The current books have parts that were not in the earlier books. So they're both Bone Rosary and the Depositions have parts that are brand new, would have been published without. And we talked about we're going to read a poem that you selected, but before that, some of the people that are not immediately recognized in the funeral business are people that work in a funeral home or periphery of the church or a cemetery. There's one beautiful poem in there called How Howard Armstrong Learned the Verities. He was a grave digger, and I realized I don't do that anymore. It's done with a power shovel. But he was a guy who would actually build a fire in the wintertime, build a fire on the gravesite to loosen the soil and go in there and dig. But this was one that I talked to you about before we started, and it's about a guy named Wesley Rice, who you'll explain. It's self-explanatory with the event. It's a powerful passage in the book.
Wesley Rice, who's dead with 11 years now, I think. Wes was a Navy corpsman in World War II, and so he followed Marines all around their adventures in the South Pacific. And he learned, and of course, the fact that he lived through that is miraculous. And it made him a very valued, he was the most valued employee we ever had in Milford, because my father, who was a combat Marine, said, whatever happens, Wes Rice never leaves unless he wants to, So, but Wes was an embalmer, and he preferred embalming to meeting with families. I took care of meeting with the families. Wes took care of the corpses. He taught me the best he could, and I taught him the best. This is a couple paragraphs that I've always thought reanimates my memory of him. A man that I work with named Wesley Rice once spent all of one day and all night carefully piecing together the parts of a girl's cranium. She'd been murdered by a madman with a baseball bat after he'd abducted and raped her. The morning of the day it all happened, she'd left for school, dressed for picture day, a schoolgirl dressed to the nines, waving at her mother, ready for the photographer. The picture was never taken. She was abducted from the bus stop and found a day later in a stand of trees just off the road, a township south of here. After he'd raped her and strangled her and stabbed her, he beat her head with a baseball bat, which was found beside the child's body. The details were reported dispassionately in the local media, along with the speculations as to which of the wounds was the fatal one, the choking, the knife, or the baseball bat. No doubt these speculations were the focus of the double post-mortem the medical examiner performed on her body before signing the death certificate. Multiple injuries. Most embalmers, faced with what Wesley Rice was faced with after he'd opened the pouch from the morgue, would have said simply, closed casket. Treated the remains enough to control the odor, zipped the pouch, and gone home for cocktails. It would have been easier. The pay was the same. Instead, he started working. 18 hours later, the girl's mother, who had pleaded to see her, saw her. She was dead, to be sure, and damaged, but her face was hers again, not the madman's version. The hair was hers, not his. The body was hers, not his. Wesley Rice had not raised her from the dead nor hidden the hard facts, but he had retrieved her death from the one who had killed her. He had closed her eyes and mouth. He'd washed her wounds, sutured her lacerations, pieced her beaten skull together, stitched the incisions from the autopsy, cleaned the dirt from under her fingernails, scrubbed the fingerprint ink from her fingertips, washed her hair, dressed her in jeans and a blue turtleneck, and laid her in a casket beside which her mother stood for 2 days and sobbed as if something had been pulled from her by force. It was the same when her pastor stood with her and told her, God weeps with you. And the same when they buried the body in the ground. It was then, and always will be, awful, horrible, unappeasably sad. But the outrage, the horror, the heartbreak belonged not to the murderer or to the media or to the morgue, each of whom had staked a claim to it. It belonged to the girl and to her mother. Wesley had given them the body back. Barbaric is what Jessica Mitford called this fussing over a dead body. I say the monster with the baseball bat was barbaric. What Wesley Rice did was a kindness. And to the extent that it is easier to grieve the loss that we see than the one that we imagine or read about in papers or hear of on the evening news, it was what we undertakers call a good funeral. It served the living by caring for the dead.
Thank you. Thank you for the backstory of Wesley Rice. That's not in the book, about his Marine background and his friendship with your father. We're getting towards the close, and I want to turn now to the poem that you asked to read, which is
The Sick of the Palsy. Is that the one?
Yes.
I have to thank, first of all, I want to thank Jill Bialowski and her team at W.W. Norton for choosing not only to publish this selection of my essays, which is a kindness to do that, to gather them together, but for selecting the cover art, which made me go looking for what's under all this. But you can see that hand, that open hand, and that's the open hand of Jesus at Capernaum in an illustration done of healing the paralytic. All of you will remember the story in 3 of the 4 Gospels of lowering the poor paralytic man through the roof to get him to the feet of his forgiveness and salvation. And I've always been blown over by that. Heaney wrote a poem called Miracle on the very same story. And we are nothing if not quite willing to borrow or steal from other poets. So this is called The Sick of the Palsy Healed and His Sins Forgiven. The graver's title tells it in reverse. So which is the greater miracle, we're asked, to cleanse the soul or cure paralysis? The mercy hidden or made manifest? The King James Version has forgiveness first, the sins remission quite invisible, and then to quiet the scribes and Pharisees. Arise, he says, take up your bed and walk. Wherefore, begrudgers and their begrudging talk of blasphemy and sacrilege are hushed. The palsied man stands up and saunters off, bedroll and ropes gathered under his arm. Behold, we never saw a thing like that. The Savior's plain on this. It's faith that saves. The boyos on the roof, like pallbearers, delivered of their corpse and coffin straps, their thankless jobs all heft and heave and lift done for yet another day, so they begin, taking up their shovels, sods, and tiles to mend the mess they've made of it again. I always wondered about what are they going to do with the open roof? You can't live with that, you know? So, yeah.
We're coming to a close. I wanted to, a lot of the things I talked about was when I first knew you 20 years ago, and what you were doing day to day and earlier in your life as a poet. What are you doing day to day these days, Tom?
I'm typing and hoping that a portion of it arises to the occasion of writing.
There's a piece in your, is this true, the your morning routine of Garrison Keillor and the Writer's Almanac on NPR? You said you get up around 7:30 and then one of the programs you listen to.
Well, I do listen to, yes, but not now. I get it online because I think the PBS stopped running it. But yeah, I think a dose of poetry is very good.
No, I agree. I get that as an email every morning, and I just wanted to do
and I do love the sound of that man's voice, whatever he reads or says.
Absolutely, and poets that I've not heard of and follow up on and embrace.
Yeah, no,
it's a great service, and I recommend that to everybody. You can just Writer's Almanac, Google that, and sign up. You'll get a daily email, and it's not just a poem, but either birthdays or historical events at that day.
Yeah, the things that happened on that same day.
So. Yeah. For the closing poem, this is a poignant poem you wrote about 9/11, but it's appropriate today with the pandemic. And
this is that poem. Tell me the name of it and the page of it so I can.
Yeah, it's called Local Heroes, and it's page 147.
Oh yeah.
You printed it in its entirety in the depositions, and then I liked it so much there. I was lucky enough to find it in Bone Rosary as well.
Well, thanks. And on the subject of the Bone Rosary, or Bone Rosary, I want to say that Josh Bodwell and his colleagues at the House of David R. Godine are the ones to be thanked for this. And Dick McDonough, the bed of heaven to him, who conspired with Josh to bring this book into being.
It's a really handsome book in every way, from the binding to the page stock. It's a wonderful.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about its goodness. So anyway, Local Heroes. And Bill, let me say thank you. You know, when you get to talk to somebody who has actually read your work and they ask you questions, you get to talk to them for an hour and they don't give you a bill. It's like going to the shrink, for free.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. And
thank you for saying that.
Local Heroes. Some days the worst that can happen happens. The sky falls, or evil overwhelms, or the world as we have come to know it turns towards the eventual apocalypse, long predicted in all the holy books. The end times of old grudge and grievances that bring us each to our oblivions. Still, maybe this is not the end at all, nor even the beginning of the end. Rather, one more in a long list of sorrows to be added to the ones thus far endured through what we have come to call our history. Another in that bitter litany that we will, if we survive it, have survived. God help us who must live through this, alive to the terror and open wounds, the heart torn, the shaken faith, the violent, vengeful soul, the nerve exposed, the broken body so mingled with its breaking that it's lost forever. Lord, send us in our peril local heroes, someone to listen, someone to watch, someone to search and wait and keep the careful count of the dead and missing, the dead and gone but not forgotten. Some days all that can be done is to salvage one sadness from the mass of sadnesses, to bear one body home, to lay the dead out among their people, organize the flowers in casseroles, write the obits, meet the mourners at the door, drive the dark processions down through town, toll the bell, dig the hole, tend the pyre. It's what we do. The day-long news is dire, full of true believers and politicos, bold talk of holy war and photo ops, but here brave men and women pick the pieces up. They serve the living by caring for the dead. Here, the distant battle is waged in homes. Like politics, all funerals are local.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was so really fun to sit back and listen to. Thank you both so much. I'm going to unmute Diane Stevenson. She's got a nice question to ask. Diane, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much, Thomas, and thank you, Bill, too, just for adding your comments and questions. And what I was thinking about was that when Thomas mentioned the Shaman Drum bookstore, and I was thinking about what a role that bookstores played, and Carl Port was a friend of mine. Role that, and the role that he played, and that, and in some ways, Bill is doing that now in a different way. But I was wondering, Thomas, about your just reflections on the changes that have happened during our generation, from bookstores to online, Amazon to and you, both of you, made comments about the physical books and covers and the binding and so on. And so many things have changed. I was just wondering if you had reflections on that or thoughts about the changes and what it means for maybe for the readers and our understandings of what we're reading and so on.
Well, God be with the days when Carl Port and his brother Tom and Keith Taylor and so many of the bookish pirates in Ann Arbor, would gather all the time, and you felt alive. And I lived, 40 minutes away from Ann Arbor, so I felt that I always had access to that, which was a gift for me, because in some ways I felt very much alone otherwise, although I had the good luck of knowing bookish people. The Reverend clergy, you get to know a lot when you're a funeral director, and they are very bookish. They not only buy books like funeral directors do, but they read books. And I don't know, I'm not as down on the sort of virtual experience that my granddaughter has when she holds up her, I think it's called an iPad, and she reads stories. I've had books falling off the shelf today, and I think there might be something to that. But anyway,
wow.
So maybe they're trying to find a way to be in the ether rather than on my shelf. So I'll leave it there anyway.
Well, I can tell you that I've gone through taking authors around for 33 years. Everything I started when the fax machine had just been invented, and I thought that was I couldn't believe that piece of paper would be in New York in 2 minutes. I just refused to believe it. And I was there before Barnes and Noble and Borders, and I'm there after the fax machine and after Borders. And it's my life, and hopefully there will be a number of people that I could connect to, like all of you. So I'm optimistic about maintaining my interest and contribution to it, and I'm not sure what the rest of the world will evolve to, but I've found that you have to find it's there, but you just have to find the level that it's on. But it is there, and we can have afternoons like this.
Well, I will say, as a youngin, I do read ebooks. I begrudgingly was given a Kindle years ago, and I was like, I'll never use this, and I use it all the time because it really is convenient. But with my kids, we only read them physical books, so their rooms are just filled with physical books. So I think that there's always going to be a place for a physical book, and it hurts me to read them in ebook if I ever have, like twice, because I think it's so important, that tactile learning for them, and hopefully that'll keep with them. And I think that there's always going to be physical books. And the beauty
audiobooks too. When I was working every day, audiobooks were important.
Well, and I've heard recently, I didn't realize there was a stigma against people who listen to audiobooks. They're like, it's, because they say, oh, you didn't actually read it, you listened to it. And they read it.
It'd be interesting to see what else they're stigmatized by.
I'm telling you. Me wearing a blue shirt, there's probably a stigma against that too.
Yes.
So I'm not getting questions, I'm getting a lot of compliments from people who are saying that this was just such a gift this afternoon. Virginia said, I appreciate this program. Thank you. I've added underlining stars and check marks all through Thomas Lynch's books. So that's a big compliment to you, that not only do they read it, but they hold it in their hearts. Beautiful conversation. I love your writing. You know what, Joseph? I think we've run out of time. Here's a request to read a snippet from the Movine notebook.
Longish poem, and I appreciate anybody who's read it. But
from a fellow descendant of Ireland's west coast, that's what Joseph says.
I can't get through it without weeping.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's all. So just lots of comments from people saying it was an incredible talk. From Blake. Cynthia says, thank you for a wonderful program. Looking forward to getting your books. So this is going to be a new reader of yours, which is great. Theodosia says, thank you, Thomas and Bill, for this gift of your voices and time. I'm struck at the way that prose and reminiscence flow into verse, into poetry.
Yeah, that's the way it works. That's the way it works.
Yeah, so I think that was it for questions.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Aaron, for organizing all this and for sponsoring this with the foundation. And Bill, here's hoping our paths will cross many times.
Oh, absolutely. And well, it was wonderful just talking to you a couple times this week. It was like picking up after decades, like it was last week. I really do appreciate you.
It is a good feeling when we can pick up where we left off.
Well, we'll do it. If I like Michigan, I'm on the way. I'll see you again.
I can be found. I'm just south of the bridge. Anyway.
So for those of you at home who are wondering what is next with this program, we want you to know that we've got some good stuff in the pipeline, right, Bill?
Yes, I was going to mention that. We're going to take a couple of months off. We're going to all be on our paddle boats and wouldn't be available on Sunday afternoons.
Hard to get Wi-Fi from the water, right?
Exactly. So whatever reason, it's, the summer will, but we're planning on coming back, and not only coming back, but we're trying to work out a way with Aaron and the people at the 19th Century Association, Charitable Association, to do events, live events, where It will be a hybrid. I really appreciate the people that have come literally from around the world to these afternoons, and I'm not going to exclude you, even if we do have live events. So we'll work it out. For all the mediums in which we communicate with you, we will let you know. And there will be a program in September, and I hope all of you are there because it's what we hope for.
Yeah.
It's
And
what we do.
I got to make my pitch here at the very end is
I'm
to
sorry
help
about
us
that.
continue to put on amazing programs like this. You know, if we're going to be doing them live and also live streaming, it's going to take a lot of people and a lot of work. We would love for you to help support us by making a donation right at our website, which is at www.19thcentury.org. There's a big button on the front page that says donate here. If you do that, we'd really appreciate it.
I'm sorry I didn't mention that. It's a very important part of these programs.
That's not a problem. You can access this video to share with others. It was recorded today, and it is going to be on our website. Give us a couple weeks. We're actually catching up from the Monday season that's just ended, and so we'll have that up so you can share Thomas's words with other people. Thomas, anything last you want to say before we sign off for the day?
Thank you.
Perfect. Bill?
And the same. Just, it's deeply appreciated. Everybody who gives us an hour of their time. We love that, and hope to continue this for a long time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Please, if it's not raining where you are, go outside and enjoy the sunshine. Have a wonderful day.